Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please do hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and please do leave us a review. It really does help make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible.
I had a real moment as we pulled into the green zone and I lifted him out of the back of this Land Rover, and I could see where this bullet had gone through his throat, and I knew he died, and I thought he died saving my life to do my job.
Mark Turnbull, our guest today, has had a 35-year career as a geopolitical communications strategist, a career that's taken him inside the American invasion of Iraq to the final days of apartheid South Africa, from the inner sanctum of a leading KGB defector to the cockpit of Cambridge Analytica. Along the way, he has run a dozen election campaigns on 3 continents. Mark has seen massive changes over that period, from the relative simplicity of an analogue world to one in which political campaigning has been revolutionised by the impact of big data and the growing threat of disinformation. Mark talks about the physical dangers and reputational risks of his trade and the pressure it put on his family, from being ambushed by insurgents in Baghdad and battling Somali warlords to taking on Putin's propaganda machine, and the sting operation which would bring down Cambridge Analytica, and along the way cast him as a poster boy for data theft and dirty tricks.
I understood, even in the grip of this, that the narrative was just too strong. And too many people were invested in it and wanted to believe it. And the story was, there comes a point where you can't fight the story.
3 years ago, on his 60th birthday, Mark was given a terminal cancer diagnosis, a final unexpected plot twist, which has brought him to reflect on his life and career in a fiercely honest, warts and all memoir brilliantly titled Clusterfuck. In it, he makes the case for how he chose to lead his life, what it meant, and why it mattered. Mark Turnbull, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you very much, Andy.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you kindly. I have to say, in preparation for this discussion, I listened to a lot of these podcasts, and I'm awed by some of the stories of courage in adversity and the way people cope with it. So I'm sitting here now with raging imposter syndrome. I'm probably not the first to tell you that. Thank you for the kind introduction, but I'm very happy to dive straight into the deep end.
Mark, well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for that. When we met a while ago, for the first time, we talked about the various jobs that we'd had. You also told me about your diagnosis. It was about a year ago, I think. And you were very, very clear with me that, because we weren't actually talking about the podcast at that stage, but we were talking about the word crisis. And you were very clear with me that you would not, have not applied the word crisis to your situation right now in terms of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
But it is, of course, a crisis of the most acute kind. Just explain to me, or explain to those watching, listening now, what you explained to me then as to why you've taken that attitude.
Well, yes, of course it was. It was an unexpected plot twist, as you said, in what had otherwise been a charmed life. And yes, it's an existential crisis to be told that you're dealing with a I can't remember how he put it now, a foreshortened event horizon. I love that Woody Allen quip about not being afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens. And I thought immediately, look, I was 60. I've had a brilliant life, an incredibly privileged life. It's been packed full of adventure. And it just seemed to me utterly kind of self-indulgent to complain that I hadn't seen this thing coming. Of course I hadn't. The news is a shock, but it could have been so much worse. As my wonderful mother, who turns 90 this year, said to me, darling, you could have just dropped dead of a heart attack, as many of our friends had, or suffered a disabling stroke, or been diagnosed with dementia. I have none of those things. I have an opportunity to pack as much in to the rest of my life as I can, with the only thing that I can control, which is my approach, my attitude to life. It's the only thing any of us can control. And having been an incurable optimist and fiercely upbeat for my entire professional career, I thought it's madness to change now. I can't change. That's just the way I am. So
it's an incredible perspective. Do you think that your career, which we're going to discuss today, do you think your career has played a part in leading you to that conclusion? You say that you look back, and the gratitude, obviously, of the life that you've led, the professional life that you've led, has sort of fueled that philosophy, if you like. But you've also spent a life, surrounded by, immersed in situations where you can just see how difficult, how unfair, how dark life can be.
Indeed.
And yet you've chosen to stay, to probably misquote Van Morrison, on the bright side of the road. But do you think the career then has played its part in leading you to that?
I think it probably has. I mean, I'd go back even further and say the way we were brought up. I come from a very happy, loving family. I'm in the middle of 3 brothers, 2 years either side of me. We were expat brats. My father was a BP, born and bred, 35-year career man. And so we were dragged around the world to wherever oil was being discovered or pumped out of the ground. And incredibly, in one way, privileged at life, but in another, you get to see how most people in the world live. And, we lived in and went to some countries where your life expectancy is a fraction of that. Kids were dying of diarrhea at the age of 5 or 6. So you sort of understand that there's no sort of overarching system of cosmic fairness built into our universe. It is the way it is. It made me thirsty for adventure, perhaps too thirsty, a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I used to say that I've sort of cheated death by an inch or a second in various ways in my life. Rock climbing and as a roughneck on the oil rigs and a commercial diver in the Arabian Gulf. Quite a few mishaps at sea and shark diving and on the ski piece.
We're going to need another episode.
Car crashes. So,
we're going to need
another. I figured I'm living on borrowed time. I've got past and through the 9 lives, so yes, I guess I chose a career that would, with a pretty high tolerance for that sort of risk-taking uncertainty. And so I've only got myself to blame. But I've never had a bad year in my entire career. Through all the ups and downs, I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Before we get into the career then, let me just ask you about the word crisis, which we've both professionally spent a lot of time around.
Indeed.
And indeed personally. What's your definition?
I think it's a set of circumstances which really confronts you at the basic level, at the core level, with questions about who you are and why you are and what you're doing here. And in that sense, I guess, as I look across my professional life, and thank you for the intro there, Andy, I can see various points, inflection points in my life which were crises. My first professional crisis, I think, was accusing Putin of war crimes. I should say that I joined a company called Bell Pottinger, Sir, then Lord Tim Bell, the first, I think, real sort of Svengali of our trade, of the communications business, charismatic, controversial, who wore the arrows in his chest with enormous pride, completely unabashed about kind of who he was, an incredible man with a real genius for communicating. And I hadn't joined him for very long before he called me up to his office and then sent me across London to in Mayfair to interview an exiled oligarch, Russian oligarch by the name of Boris Berezovsky, and the KGB defector Alexander Litvinenko, both of whom were sort of holed up in London and seeking exile.
Just explain for those watching, listening, your role at this stage. So you've worked at a PR firm we are gonna go backwards at some point, by the way, because I want to trace back the the kind of characteristics that kind
of
fuel this group. Where did the trouble start? But by this stage in your career, you've worked in a PR firm in Canada, I think.
I had.
You decided actually that it was the world of communications, reputation, PR that you wanted to be in.
Yes. Yes.
And you found yourself at Tim Bell's. You found yourself at Tim Bell's door. So you're being hired here.
Yes.
As a strategic, as a sort of strategic advisor in the Tim Bell universe.
That's exactly right.
A universe that included controversial figures. Tim's attitude of life was much like a lawyer. Everyone deserves an opportunity to present their story in the way that they want to present their story.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I got all that about right.
Yes, I think you have got about that. I mean, I washed up on the shores of public relations, having tried and failed at a whole bunch of other things, and with a philosophy degree in my back pocket and a master's in international politics, emigrated to Canada. 2 unsuccessful startups under my belt, mid to late 20s. What can I do with my life? And so, yes, I stalked the biggest PR company, sat in their reception until they gave me a job in Canada, and then finally I came back to the UK and found myself sitting in front of this extraordinary figure. To be interviewed as part of his sort of Praetorian Guard. And I met Tim the first time. He was, and anyone who knows him will recognise this, sitting in his eyrie in Hertford Street, wreathed in cigarette smoke, on the phone. And I came into his office and he beckoned me to sit down. And all I could hear was his side of the telephone conversation. And he said, David, if you think posing at the Garden Gate with your wife and family is going to resolve this, you're basically a bigger wanker than I thought that you were. And he slammed the phone down and he said, you must be Mark Turnbull here for a job. That was our esteemed Heritage Minister, David Mellor, who's enjoyed sexual favours with a part-time actress and now thinks he can talk his way out of it. And I remember sitting there thinking, blimey, never occurred to me that, part of the day job would be scolding a cabinet minister for his misbehaviour. But that was Tim. Unbridled honesty. He used to say, PR is nothing more than a truth well told. That was disingenuous. I also heard him say, never, why tell the truth when a good lie will do, and never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
How do you sort of reflect back on that now?
with a great deal of pride, I have to say, and enjoyment. I mean, towards the end of his life, Tim went on Paxman, and Jeremy Paxman asked him the question, Tim, as the, we all know you have this sort of Rolodex of discredited rogues and regimes and so forth. I mean, is there anyone you wouldn't work for? And Tim said, I'm not a priest, people come to me for a fair hearing, and if they work for or represent authoritarian regimes, I'll only work for them if they promise to reform. And I burst out laughing. That was Tim to a T. And again, thoroughly disingenuous. But he was loyal and generous and instinctively brilliant, and he parachuted me behind enemy lines for 18 years in various parts of the world to sort out problems or to run elections and so forth. Not least sending me down to South Africa as part of the team which worked first of all on the de Klerk Mandela election in '94. That's where I cut my political teeth. That's where I realised for the first time, I think, that this innocuous sounding phrase, public relations, was actually the oil of the modern world, of the communications world. It was everything, power of narrative to sway people and tell the national story, particularly at the point where an entire country was mired in crisis, was brilliant. And 4 years I spent there working for the ANC and for other corporations, midwifing the birth of the new Rainbow Nation, was an incredible experience, and I wouldn't have had it had I not signed up with Tim. So I'm hugely grateful to him for that. But the occasion of the Berezovsky and Litvinenko episode, it tested me because I thought, do we really want to throw an international press conference branding the Russian president a war criminal? I mean, that is pretty chewy by anyone's standards. But when I met Berezovsky, who was a small, wiry, bustling, energetic guy, and Litvinenko, who was no one's idea of a KGB director, he was calm and courteous and spread out across the table, he explained to me exactly how and why Putin and the FSB, as the KGB now known, orchestrated a bombing campaign in Russia in '99, in which 200 people were killed, in order to blame the Chechens and propel Putin to the presidency. And I had enough evidence there, I thought, to go ahead and run the press conference. I did have a moment, I have to tell you, in the lift on the way down from those 2 days in which I was closeted with them, when Litvinenko told me, in my briefcase, of course, I had all the evidence ready, and I was beginning to sweat slightly, and he said, watch out when you cross the road, because hit and run is the KGB's preferred assassination method. And I don't mind telling you, I did run all the way back to the office.
I mean, Berezovsky was a divisive figure in some ways, right? Some saw him as a sort of heroic whistleblower, others as a sort of self-serving oligarch. Yeah. How did you navigate that sort of complexity then when crafting the sort of narrative around that?
We all knew that Boris had blood on his hands. I mean, you don't get to be an oligarch and profit from the privatization or piratisation, I should say, of Russian state assets back in the day without being completely unscrupulous. His bodyguard was killed. He had several death threats. Litvinenko himself was ordered by Putin to assassinate Berezovsky. It was his refusal to do so which led Litvinenko to flee to Britain and seek asylum. And the two of them knew that they would be hunted down and killed on British soil by the Russian state. They knew it. Our job was just to make life as uncomfortable as possible for Putin. So we had to kind of learn the Kremlin propaganda playbook. This is way back in the day when it was almost quaint. You know, we held press conferences and put out press releases and drew attention to human rights abuses in Chechnya. And Boris would fund us to go and run election campaigns along the rim of the former Soviet Union to unsettle Putin. But this was before Russia really industrialized its disinformation and propaganda capability.
What's your sort of state of mind at this stage of your career? Because I think anyone listening to this will be thinking, this is pretty dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
Right? You're not a soldier. There's a lot of former military end up in this world. You're not, as far as I'm aware, a spy. You'll tell me whether I'm wrong about that.
No, I'm not. I'm still disabusing my children of that notion.
And you've never been in the employ of MI6, as far as I'm aware.
That's correct.
You were there as a sort of story shaper, as a sort of the guy who was helping to shape and deliver this narrative. The other side of your life, you're happily married, you've got kids. You've got a secure, lovely home. You've got two sides of a coin that are
bizarre,
entirely at odds with each other. One might argue. How did you? Yeah. How are you managing that?
Yes.
And were you always comfortable with it?
I managed it by compartmentalising it. I think a lot of blokes would understand. And I remember when we won the contract against all the odds to do the communications for the first election campaign in war-torn Iraq. This was a year after the invasion in 2003. You remember we'd sort of kicked the door in the point of a gun, promising democracy, and pretty much everything had gone wrong from day one. You know, no weapons of mass destruction, looting and rioting in the streets, a Shia uprising, a Sunni uprising, terrorist campaign, sectarian violence. For those who thought that the war itself was fought, was an illegal, completely specious pretext for invading Iraq, and then it rapidly became a fiasco. And I remember the day we got engaged. I got engaged to Juliet, probably the best decision I ever made in my life, because she's an extraordinary woman about whom I cannot say enough. But the day I did, my body armour arrived in the reception at Bell Pottinger, and I had some explaining to do. I had to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I hadn't seen it coming. We've won this business. I'm going into a war zone. It's a 4-month contract, but we've got to persuade the Iraqi people to get out and vote. And Al-Qaeda are cutting off their heads, and we've got to sell this strange thing called democracy. And I'm going to be away for a while, so would you mind selling your house, my house, buying our marital home, and organising a wedding? And I will sort of parachute in, rather like Timothy Dalton, for our wedding. I mean, what an idiot. But she did, and she took everything in her stride, incredibly. But the thing is, for 17 years I was living in shipping containers in war zones one way or another, from 8 years in Iraq, 3 in Somalia and various other places. And Juliet, for a lot of that time, brought up our kids single-handedly. And even the fact of our having children was something of a miracle. Juliet herself had been diagnosed with cervical cancer in her early 30s. She'd narrowly escaped a death, lost her cervix, told she probably wouldn't have children.
Oh, goodness.
So conceiving our daughter, Olivia, no one knew it at the time, but she was 6 weeks pregnant when she walked down the aisle. And then again, Jack, 2 years later. These were kind of miracle kids for us, quite extraordinary. And Juliet paid a big price. You know, she was diagnosed with a condition called lymphedema, which is the swelling of a limb, in this case one of her legs. And it meant that she's had to wear compression stockings and have certain massages. It's affected every single dimension of her life. But that was a price she was willing to pay for the fact that we've got 2 beautiful children.
Astonishing.
And the liberty of me being herring off like a mad bugger, doing what I was doing while she anchored the home front. So
So everything that she's endured, I suspect, is also another factor.
She could be sitting where I'm sitting, having the flip side of the same conversation about the crises in her life, because she dealt with me. It was easier for me being in Iraq, being rocketed and mortared and shot at. Talk about crisis. That was a physical crisis. I think it was the only time, really, I thought I'm gonna die.
Just talk us through
out
that
here. Well,
give us an idea where in the career timeline does this moment sit, by the way, just to give everyone context.
Yeah, 2000, so we're now 2004, a 4-month contract, the election campaign, long story as to how and why we won it, but it was ludicrously improbable. Next thing, I'm strapped into a C-130 doing a tactical landing into Baghdad in the middle of the night, and then barreling down the highway. You land in the airport in Baghdad, and you've got a sort of 8-10 kilometre road between the airport and what we called the green zone. It's wonderful, isn't it? We put names on everything, and we signal. We had taken over the presidential palace. That's where the Americans were sitting. The new sheriff was in town, and the green zone was this sort of 30-acre or 300-acre. I can't remember, but it was covered in blast walls, surrounded by blast walls and machine gun nests. That was the safe zone. Everywhere outside that was the red zone. And the most expensive taxi ride in the world was getting from the airport to the green zone, which you did either in heavily armoured vehicles or, in my case, in soft-skin Land Rovers, which were called rocket magnets.
And as someone who was there not under the cover of the security that the military might provide, or indeed the other agencies at play, you were there as a comms guy, working for a commercial outfit.
There as a comms guy, and we had to hire our own security. So we hired a British security firm, who in turn hired a largely Iraqi security team, and met us at the airport with 3 Land Rovers. And you, as the client, would sit in the middle, and the first and third would sort of box and cox their way as you hooned down this highway, which the Americans had cleared either side for about 200 yards to try and clear away. But every single bad guy in Iraq with a rifle, an RPG, a mortar, considered it sport to try and pick you off on the road. And so so it came to pass. I had a sort of presentiment that it would. I talked to the security team to the extent, actually, that they put me, unusually, in the lead vehicle, because I thought, well, I can outsmart the bad guys here. So I was sitting in the lead vehicle when we passed a couple of Mercedes on the road, and the windows came down and the machine guns came out. It was like Al Capone in the 1920s. And I made like a carpet on the back seat of the vehicle, as you do. I was wearing body armor and helmet. I could feel and hear the bullets punching through the soft skin of the Land Rover. And it was all over in seconds. But one of their cars was it sort of exploded and flew off the road, and the other one just went into reverse. But it did kill the guy sitting behind me, who was the machine gunner, as it were, and who was sitting on my briefcase, covered it in blood and bits of glass, and it was I had a real moment as we pulled into the green zone, and I lifted him out of the back of this Land Rover, and I could see where this bullet had gone through his throat, and I knew he died, and I thought he died saving my life to do my job. And that was a real moment, because I could take anything else. I mean, 2 weeks earlier, I'd been blown up by an RPG at the top of our hotel in the red zone, which narrowly missed me, but it shredded my clothes and peppered me with shrapnel. And I could kind of take that. I sort of understood that. This is the war we're fighting in, and I've signed up to be a civilian, effectively a combatant. But when that's
how you viewed yourself. There was a moral purpose that sat behind this, as well as the fact that it was a huge job.
Moral purpose, and I have to tell you, it had nothing to do with peddling coalition propaganda or being apologists for the war or trying to sell it in any way. Our job was to try and make the case for peace, and to transform a violent dynamic into one of peaceful political engagement, and thus try and persuade Iraqis to have a stake in their own future and save lives, both Iraqi and coalition. That's what we were doing.
So did those two incidents harden that resolve? There must have been doubt. There must have been, what on earth am I doing here?
Well, Juliet was, what on earth are you doing there?
But you weren't thinking that for a second?
Yes, I was. But the bigger part of me was thinking, and maybe this is just a vanity or ego, the mission, the sense of mission and purpose is incredibly important to me.
Is there something else as well? We've had a number of war correspondents on this podcast. My friend Jeremy Bowen being one of them.
Ah, yes.
Who has found himself in very similar situations to the ones that you've described. Colleagues being killed next to him. He told us, or he characterised it as an addiction. He said that he absolutely, as a result of the job that he's done, became addicted to danger, to risk. Is there a bit of that in you?
Yes, maybe a little bit in me, Andy. I think
you flicked at the younger you swimming with sharks, diving without any training.
Yes,
I think you did.
Yes, I did.
When you were working on the rig. So
yes,
can I suggest that you might be downplaying that element just a little bit, and in fact that is a fairly dominant aspect of your character?
I think what goes alongside my adventurer's heart, I would describe it as, rather than an addiction to risk or adrenaline.
You are a wordsmith.
I am. But I think it is an important point that runs alongside that, and that is, we need a purpose in life. And I'm very mission-driven. And when we were sitting in Iraq, I remember sitting under my desk because the mortars were coming in. And it was about 3 weeks before my wedding. I was in my mid-40s. And I told everybody, just get under the desk. Just sit under your desks and carry on working. There's a deadline here, laptops open, carry on talking to each other and working. And all we could hear was the dust coming off the ceiling because the mortars were coming in. And I figured we either take a direct hit, in which case this is all academic, or we don't, in which case keep buggering on, as
so
Churchill so famously
said.
Fatalistic
About it, yeah.
I am pretty fatalistic, and there is something about Nelson on the quarterdeck, I have to say, about me, Andy. I think a calm head is incredibly important. Panic doesn't help ever. And so I try and quell that side of me.
In that your sort of strategy or your approach, this is an acute example that you're giving us here, but when in crisis, your practical kind of approach, summarise it for us.
Yes, I think, a few things. One, don't panic, Captain Mannering, not least because people are looking to you for that kind of example and leadership. I don't know whether it can be taught, but a calm head is incredibly important. Behind the calm head, of course, I've got a loving family and friends, and I'm emotionally grounded. So I'm not liable to go spinning off in the midst of all of this. Sense of purpose, I understand why I'm there, what I'm doing. It's incredibly important, I think. We were there for 8 years. And for every year of that, I thought, even though it was all going to hell in a handbasket, what we're doing here is incredibly important work.
Meaningful.
Incredibly meaningful work. And I think the final piece of that, that coping mechanism, is a sense of humour.
Massively underrated.
It's massively underrated. I remember sitting in the Marsden, being given my terminal cancer diagnosis. And of course, part of me was in shock. Part of me was preparing to sort of set the dial to stoic fortitude, which is my default. But another part of me was remembering and savouring that wonderful gag by the late Bob Monkhouse, who also died of prostate cancer. He went on Parkinson. And Parky said, "I'm sorry to hear the news." And Bob said, "Look, it went like this. Chap in the white coat told me, 'I'm sorry, Bob, you've got terminal prostate cancer.' He said, 'I'm not being funny, Doc, but would you mind sticking 2 fingers up my bum? I'd like a second opinion.'" And that was going through my mind. And I thought, what is this? Now, is that some sort of displacement activity? I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. When you alluded to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, so-called scandal.
It was a scandal, Mark. Well, we don't get to decide whether these things are scandals or not. It was a scandal.
It was a scandal. And I remember I was sitting there on the... it was a classic sting operation, which was a Channel 4 sting. But the New York Times and the Observer and others had weighed in. They were setting their traps, and they were determined to bring Cambridge Analytica down.
Can I, before you dive in on Cambridge Analytica, because I absolutely want to talk about this. We're sort of racing through the various points of crisis in your life. But let's just pause for a second. How did you come to join Cambridge Analytica? What excited you about the company? And was it this? Did you see it really, or did you see the company as being at the sort of cutting edge of what you consider to be this sort of new frontier on the trade that you'd spent so many years working in, reputation? Is that really what it was about, influence?
Yeah. Well, I needed a job.
Slightly less of a philosophical decision.
Well, yes and no. Yes, I need.
So you come out of Iraq. Let's just paint the picture for people.
I'd come out of Iraq, yes, and yeah, exactly. And my job disappeared from underneath me. Bell Pottinger, Chime, the holding company, split, and Tim Bell and his merry men went on one way, and Chime went on the other. And they both looked at our little unit. The special operations, special projects, as we called it then. There were a dozen of us, and for a few years, for about 5 years in the history of Chime, we dozen made over half the profit of a group 700 people strong, but we were secret and we were hidden in the basement. And because the Iraq contract, when it became a little harder edged to take on Al-Qaeda and counterinsurgency and counter-radicalization, it was classified by the Americans. So we kind of couldn't even admit to it being there. So Chime was sitting on this spigot of cash in the basement, and they were spreading it across as many of the other companies as they could possibly kind of get away with. And so when the music stopped, there wasn't a chair for us. They all looked at us and said, well, we got away with it for this long. We can't...
You can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah. So we were closed down. I was, for the second time, let go by Chime. I think that's a record. I mean, I don't think anyone else has been fired twice from Bell Pottinger. And retreated down to our holiday home on the south coast. And I was sort of whittling wood on the beach in West Wittering, thinking, I need a job, you know. And what do I do? And I promised Juliet something more London-based, UK-based, bit of travel, but calmez vous. And so when I got the call from Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, I sort of flipped open the laptop, I Googled him and his partner in crime, Nigel Oakes, and I could sort of see what they were doing. I had no idea about big data. So in parenthesis, I don't do social media, Andy. This might seem strange, given that I was the managing director and so-called sort of Darth Vader of this organization that was advancing fearlessly into the world of big data and psychographic profiling and behavioral micro-targeting. I don't do social media, partly because I didn't want Al-Qaeda to come and kill me. It was very good reasons, and partly because I instinctively saw it as a kind of addiction that was infantilizing a people and our society and hollowing us out from the inside. And we can talk about that.
You reached that conclusion.
I did.
Quite early on.
I did. I saw it. I thought no good is going to come of this. So, you know, the attention span problem and the polarization, all people sitting in their echo chambers and filter bubbles, curating, going to great lengths to create this sort of idealized image of themselves, and adjusting their news feed.
But you made a decision then to join a company that
who was right in the midst of all of this,
right in the midst of that, and was seeking advantage left, right, and centre,
and proud of the work that it was doing. And Nick said, "Look, you know, we've got 5,000 data points on 250 million Americans. You know, we know people better than they know themselves now because of the internet and our surveys and these vast data machines and learning models. We can model and segment any electorate down to a district."
That's a line from a Bond film, I think, and I don't think it came out of Bond's mouth, if I can put it.
Well, and he sort of did a bit. He looked a bit like a Bond villain. I'm not surprised when it came down. And actually, I was warned before I joined Cambridge Analytica. People said to me, "Mark, you know, you're dealing with an outsized ego." and a sort of Teflon-coated self-regard, and somebody else for whom the facts will never get in the way of a good story. So while I liked Alexander, he was also very charismatic and charming. Trust, not so much. But I thought, yeah, I can handle this. I mean, I could handle Tim Bell. I'd spent a few years working with Tim Spicer, and that was no picnic. I thought I can handle outsized egos, and I can do my own thing. And anyway, he and his cohort of data scientists were sitting in an office on the first floor of 55 New Oxford Street.
And everybody was knocking on the door.
All of the organizational resources had swung to the US. Mm-hmm. And so he took me on to do the rest of the world. He said, now you just run election campaigns, build a team, the rest of the world. We already had Kenya. We're deep into Kenyatta's campaign. And so that's what I did. And I thought, well, you can do that over there, and I'm going to do this.
So the moral purpose that you'd found in Iraq, you were seeking out the moral purpose at Cambridge Analytica, or
I was,
and
I found it.
Right,
and I found it amongst the folks that worked with and for me in our, in the campaigns that we were doing. We often thought about which clients we would take on, what we were seeking to achieve, what was legitimate, what we wouldn't do.
And there was, as ever with these situations, there was a lot of very clever, very good work being done.
Yeah,
am I right?
Some terrific work being done,
and a bit like Nick's, right? This is a podcast that seeks to be non-judgmental. Even Nick's charismatic, super smart.
Yeah,
I mean, as a leader. Of the team and of the staff.
Yeah.
Was he someone who inspired loyalty? Was he?
I think he did. I mean, he was relentlessly upbeat.
Yes.
He had a kind of Tiggerish enthusiasm. He bounced around the office.
Yes.
Extolling the virtues of this brave new world.
Yes.
I never quite bought it, if I'm perfectly honest. I didn't really understand it. I was much more... I mean, I got into this business because I'm fascinated by the way we're all hardwired, the human brain, and how we think and feel and behave the way we do. And it seems to me that, every endeavor you can think of, from the boardroom to the battlefield, is about understanding and motivating people, and communication sits at the heart of that. And so therefore, I'm the guy with the bullhorn in the strategy room going, who are you? What do you do? Why are you here? Why do you matter? And if you don't know the answers to those questions, you shouldn't be in business or in politics. And if you can answer them, I'm going to help you answer them in a far more concise and lucid way. If you can't get it down on one page, you don't know what you're doing. And if you can't get it down in one paragraph, you're never going to persuade anybody. So that was my calling, if you like. That was my business. And I think, Nix and Oakes and all the rest came from the same stable, but they saw this bright, shiny thing, the data analytics, the algorithms that could determine human behavior. And I thought, nah, I don't. I mean, I never saw elections being won by machine-generated adverts. I thought, no, this is about human creativity at heart. And it's about candidates and policy ideas. And I'm afraid I'm not so much big data, but small data, because I think the irreducible unit of any election campaign is the individual human being. And we're not consumers or rats in a maze or clusters of neurons being, guided, nudged by your algorithm. We're human beings. So healthy skepticism about that side, but I loved the excitement of working in a company with these incredibly bright data scientists plotting the American electoral landscape and threading this improbable way through. So, boy, remember 2016, Andy, within the space of 4 months, we had Trump and we had Brexit. And although Cambridge Analytica didn't actually secure a paid contract or do any work on Brexit, there were enough people that thought their fingerprints were all over them. And of course, Alexander was, nudges as good as a wink to a bishop. So he sort of...
No, he rather liked the idea that people thought...
He loved the idea. And so he painted a big target on it.
And also, the mood around all of that at the time, which is often the case until, it's great until it's not. The media...
Yeah. Oof.
The media, certainly the political class,
Oof.
Our game, right, in comms and reputation, everybody was terribly excited about it.
Yeah.
And everybody was, frankly, quite impressed by it.
Yes.
And wanted a slice of it.
Yeah.
That's the truth of it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by the door was being knocked.
Yes.
Pretty heavily and repeatedly, right?
Afterwards, he would say, this is our trump card, no pun intended. You only need one case study.
Yeah.
And this is it. The problem was that half the world who was horrified by Trump and Brexit were heading in the wrong direction, heading out of the door and away from us. And the other half that were heading towards us was anyone who thought, wow, I want the killer algorithm under the bed. And that included a lot of regimes and leaders and so forth.
A lot of regimes, a lot of politicians of all flavours.
They just wanted...
And all tribes.
Yeah.
Everybody just reached the
Wanted
conclusion
that.
there is a silver bullet here.
That's it.
And I want it.
That's it.
Let's talk about how it went wrong. You were there, I think, for about 2 years.
I was.
When you suddenly found yourself...
Yes.
In a at the wrong end of the story.
Yeah.
Just tell us what happened.
Well, it was I should have known better. I've spent my entire career advising clients on crisis and curveballs and media interviews, and here I was, right in the middle of it. Channel 4 hired an actor pretending to be a client, a Sri Lankan philanthropist, and I went to meet him, first me and then our data scientist, a guy, to talk about what we could do to reform the political system in Sri Lanka and get some honest politicians elected so that this business could extend these philanthropic projects. It was really exciting. And so he asked me about how we could do this, particularly given that it's basically an authoritarian regime in Sri Lanka, and there's no room for doing this openly. We had to be incredibly discreet. And so I sort of unpacked for him a lot of the work we'd done in Iraq, which was all unattributed, advertising and so forth, and other parts of the world. With that aim in mind. Well, of course, if you strip away all the context, I'm beginning to sound like some kind of rogue arm of MI6. And finally, this actor said, well, I really want to meet your boss. I can't go back to Sri Lanka and sign the contract until we've got Nix. And so one snowy December day, I said to Alexander, come and join me for champagne, high tea, and that was in the Berkeley Hotel. And one more conversation with this chap, and I think we can sign the business. And so in we walked, oblivious to the unmarked van outside and the fact that the place had been wired with cameras and for sound in the corner of this bar. And halfway through the conversation, all pretense was suddenly abandoned by this guy. And he suddenly said, look, let me cut to the chase. I'm really looking for, someone who can film politicians in compromising situations. and discredit them. And I sat there thinking, I've just wasted 6 months on this clown. So I was angry. And I'd already told him, there are companies out there may do that. We don't do that. And I expected Alexander, sitting next to me, to put him straight. But of course, Alexander's a salesman. And he didn't so much cross the line as charge across it like a wounded rhino. And off he went, entertaining these ludicrous speculations about what we can and can't do. And I sat there thinking, this has really gone off the rails. And to my, Andy, afterwards I thought maybe I should have stood up and said, I want nothing to do with this. He's talking rubbish. You're a rogue, and I want nothing to do with this. But I'm English, and we're polite, and you don't throw your boss under a bus in what you think is a private client meeting. I also thought, because I'm operational, whatever he agrees won't matter, because when it comes to the operations, I decide what we can and can't and will and won't do. So I put that out of my mind, really. But what I didn't know was that this was the last piece of the sting operation, which led to the Channel 4, a week of me starring on the Cambridge Analytica files and the so-called scandal. I say so-called because it was made up of two parts. Part number one was the accusation that Cambridge Analytica had either stolen or scraped or harvested 50 million Facebook profiles 2 years before I joined the company, and they'd use those to win the American election. Part number two was the sting and the shredding of Alexander's credibility, because he was sitting there sort of admitting to entrapping politicians and subverting democracy and, shipping in the Ukrainian hookers. You couldn't believe it. It had everything that a good scandal needs, with the cherry on top. The fact of the matter is, when the scandal broke, is horrible. Because you feel personally, I felt like I was like a butterfly pinned in the...
Just finish up on the so-called bit.
Yeah, okay.
So why...
So the so-called bit.
So why,
why do I say so-called? Okay. Because over in the States, the whole business of whether Cambridge Analytica did or didn't steal or inappropriately take these
Facebook data,
was never resolved, and there were parliamentary hearings and congressional hearings and so forth.
Facebook moved away pretty swiftly.
Yeah, Facebook. They lost 100 billion plus on their share price, but they said, first of all, you have to understand that our entire business model is based on people doing exactly this. You're being chased around the web by people who want your business, and we can help you do that through Facebook. So there was nothing untoward or illegal or ethics, nothing, but certainly nothing illegal about this. So that's the first thing. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that they didn't lay a glove on the company in respect of that particular charge. The other charge, you've been very naughty boys, and you can't, you have been authors of dereliction, dreadful subversion of democracy and so forth. That charge was investigated by the Information Commissioner's Office, who raided the office in SWAT jackets, ICO SWAT jackets like the FBI, and carted off all the computers, terabytes of information. And 2 years later, came back and apologized and said, actually, we found no evidence whatsoever that Cambridge Analytica played any role in the Brexit campaign or broke any rules with regards to safeguarding of data. So we're sorry about that. But this is 2 years later, and 120 people have lost their jobs, and we've all gone down the Swanee.
So are you bitter about that?
No, not remotely. Not remotely. Because I understood, even in the grip of this, that the narrative was just too strong. And too many people were invested in it and wanted to believe it. And the story was, there comes a point where you can't fight the story. And there was no point in me standing up and saying, oh, hang on a second, just for the record, I've never hacked anyone's data or bribed or entrapped a politician or bought an election or incited tribal or racial violence or done any of the other things that you laid at our door. Because I wouldn't be believed, and secondly, that just sounds horribly self-exculpatory, So I thought, no, I joined this company. I was proud to have served with this company. We had some fantastic people doing great work, and I couldn't disown all of that. I just thought, this is absurd. The whole charade around the breaking of the story and the narrative inflation around it, I just thought, well, Mark, you chose this profession and you had to have known, ultimately, that you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of a particular story. And so you take it on the chin. And the big irony about my situation is that because I didn't do social media, the Twitchfork mob couldn't get me. They couldn't find me. I have no digital footprint. So while others were being hounded, I mean, I got papped and so forth, as you did, Andy. But no microphones peering into the living room, and no doom scrolling of hate and vitriol aimed at me. I felt like I was a bit part player caught up in this, in a crisis.
But you were still, though, for the first time at the wrong end of the story. As someone whose job it was, if you like, to control the narrative.
Yeah,
you're in the story, and you totally lost control of the narrative.
I did.
How did that feel?
Look, I mean, it felt pretty horrible. It felt even worse going home and telling Juliet, who wasn't particularly well at the time, and I went home with a big, thick binder of Channel 4 accusations and said, I think you need to read this. And she was like, I can't believe, you joined this company for a quiet life, and I can't believe you've done this. I felt, and we lost a few friends as a result, people who didn't understand or wouldn't give me the benefit of the doubt. And there were some nights, I have to say, where I woke up, rather sweaty in the middle of the night and thought, my God, why am I part of this? And for about a month, I wouldn't answer the doorbell because I had this horrible feeling, this presentiment that there'd be cameras and so forth. And I wanted to protect the family from that. Probably for a good 6 months, I was shaken by it, but I was determined not to let it define me. So even while all this was happening, I climbed out of the wreckage of Cambridge Analytica, even while the good ship was sliding beneath the waves, and was offered a life raft by one of the investors in the company, and I took some of my team with me, and we set up I thought, well, I'm going to set up my own agency to do the kind of work we were doing, dial the moral compass up to about 11, and put our values in the shop window, as it were, and be entirely unapologetic about who we are and what we do. The first thing I did was walk down, cross the bridge into the Financial Times and say, hello, with my investor. I'm Mark Turnbull, Cambridge Analytica. I'm setting up a new agency. They were like, "You gods!" So I gave them the story, and we made the front page, our launch. And I thought,
and the pitch of Allspecs, which was the company, is essentially moral data.
Yeah, it was. We're going to do good work for good people, effectively, and we're looking for strong, positive outcomes. And I think my pitch to the team was, if you look across the world, most societies, particularly in the developing world, 99% are completely disenfranchised and poor and have nothing. Power is concentrated in the hands of the 1%. Let's see if we can bridge the gap between power and the people and hold politicians accountable. Let's see if we can find the up-and-coming politicians that want really good change and attach ourselves to them and deliver. And we did. We found a couple. We did some brilliant work.
So this podcast is about lessons, essentially.
Yeah.
What's the lesson there? The lesson there is you went through a very difficult period, but ultimately what you were able to do is dig into that crisis and find an opportunity.
Exactly. I think, don't give up. And don't let other people define who you are and what you believe and why you do what you do. So stay true to yourself. Big lesson for me. And get back on the horse.
And confront the mistakes?
Yes, and confront the mistakes.
So how would you
honestly,
how would you characterise your mistakes?
Oh my God, they're legion, Andy. We have another session lined up. We all make mistakes all the time. But if you're doing things for what you think are the right reasons, then you do them, and don't spend too long engaged in endless post-mortems about what you do. I've had friends saying you shouldn't have been in Iraq. Simply being in Iraq means that you've got blood on your hands. You were part of an illegal invasion. You shouldn't have done it. You've profited from the Iraqi people. You shouldn't have helped to run de Klerk's election campaign against Mandela. You were on the wrong side of the argument. How could you possibly do that? These are long and complex discussions to have. How could you work with Gaddafi? He's terror. He's funding terrorism around the world. Yeah, he is. But if the brief is to normalize Libya's relations with the rest of the world,
which our own Prime Minister was pretty keen on doing,
I'm with him. I'm with him. So I chose to work in an industry freighted with moral hazard. And every political, and you could argue business, decision you make has moral ambiguity and decisions and trade-offs and compromises attached to it. So don't second-guess yourself the whole time. Trust your instincts.
And you obviously hold to the view that, at this stage of your life, that this is a discussion worth having, and that this kind of moral ambiguity, the grey, which is often where we find ourselves in this podcast,
always in the grey,
is a place that we should explore perhaps a little bit more than we have done previously.
Yes.
So you're going to pour all this into you have poured all this into your book.
I have.
Congratulations on the title, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Subtitle is Misadventures of a Global Propagandist.
Very good. Just tell us about the book. What's the plan? How was it to write? How are you feeling about it?
Well, I was prompted to write it by the diagnosis, because I thought, well, if I don't know how long I've got left, and I don't want to waste this time, and so I thought I'll write something for Juliet and the children, and for friends. When I started getting into it, though, I thought, actually, this has commercial value, I think, beyond, because the adventures that I've had in the grey world of strategic communications are really worth recording, and some of the lessons learned and and so forth. Particularly as we hurtle into a new world of artificial intelligence, which will be exponentially transformative. My career is rooted in the analog world. We're now heading into uncharted territory. We're also at war. It's an information propaganda war. We're being assaulted by Russia, China, others who, and authoritarianism is on the rise in the world. Democracy is in the retreat. Even though, ironically, last year more people voted than in human history, the fact of the matter is we are under attack. And our enemies are causing us to lose faith in our own institutions, our own values, ultimately in ourselves. And so we're fighting a psychological war here. The next war is, the battlefield is in our minds. And we need to be equipped to fight it. And so I thought, I'm going to write a book about this.
What's the key lesson then from the history that we've only scraped the surface of in this conversation? But what's the key learning from your career that can help us navigate this next phase? What is it? Is it critical thinking? Is it that we need to get in early with the next generation? That this is a conversation that should be taking place in schools at an earlier stage? Is it about the attitude of our politicians? Is it about where do we start with?
Yeah, Andy, all the above. Our military is at probably the lowest state since the Napoleonic Wars. So I think we've sleptwalked into one of the most dangerous periods of our history. So yes, I think it's about rediscovering. We're clever at this sort of stuff. In the First and Second World Wars, the Sefton Delmers and Dudley Clarks, and so we are really clever at understanding psychological operations and so forth. But we sort of lost all of this. We need to find it again. We've lost Generation Z, I read in a report the other day. They don't know what they believe in. They're frightened. Only 10% of them would fight for their country. We seem to have been losing a sense of who we are.
So it's about a sense of patriotism.
It is.
And it is also a sense of, you're arguing the positive case for propaganda skills.
Yes, I am.
Because we've got no choice.
No, and we're being outthought.
If we believe in who we are and what we are, we have got to play that game.
Define those values,
is your view,
and project those values,
and develop those skills.
Yes, absolutely, and find the best of the private sector who are doing incredible work in this space, and the government and military, and put them all together and create, if you like, a task force up to the crisis we face as a nation.
This podcast is in danger of sounding like an MI6 recruitment video.
Well, listen,
because this is the case, right?
The reason I called my book Clusterfuck, which is a bit rude and risque, is that one of the observations I've had in my life is that geopolitics is driven by cock-up rather than conspiracy. Okay, and
often, yeah.
Everyone who's looking for a master plan in the bottom drawer, well, there isn't one. Okay, and often no one's in charge. Even the people in charge don't know who's in charge. And the law of unintended consequences is alive and well. And we have to be, I think, I'm incredibly proud to be a Brit. I think we're amongst the cleverest, most ingenious entrepreneurial people in the world. So now we need to start applying ourselves to this, because we're being outspent, outfought by our enemies. And this is not a pitch for MI6 or MI5. Although I hold both organisations in the highest regard.
Indeed. Mark Turnbull, thank you so much for joining us today.
Huge pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, then please do leave us a review. And if you found it helpful or even inspiring, we would be delighted if you recommended us to your friends. It means an awful lot if you do. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website, along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com, and thank you so much for listening.